Well, thank you all again for joining us for today's Lunch with Life course presentation. This series was really put together just to give quick, bite-sized, informative, hands-on information about how to use various LifeCourse tools. This week, we're going to be talking about doing step-by-step with the integrated support star. And I'll be presenting today. I'm Jenna Allen. I work at Ocali in the Lifespan Transition Center as a transition to adulthood consultant. And I'm also proud to be a Charting the Life course ambassador. And as we go through today's presentation, if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat as we go along. I will try to monitor those as I'm presenting, but if I don't get back to you in real time, we will have some time at the end for live questions. And then also I'll try to get to any chat questions that I wasn't able to get to during the presentation as well. So just wanted to say a couple of words about the Charting LifeCourse Framework. It was developed for and by people with disabilities and their families. And it's part of a national community of practice hosted by the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services and the University of Missouri Institute for Human Development. The community of practice members commit to using LifeCourse principles and share their learning with others to help advance the framework and tools. And today's presentation and most of the presentations that you'll see through the Family Resource Network of Ohio are supported by that agency, the Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council, OSU, Cincinnati Children's, University of Cincinnati, USUD, and funding for the statewide effort is also generously provided by the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. So just a couple of words about the Charting LifeCourse Framework before we dive straight into the integrated support star. Charting the LifeCourse is really about the core belief that all people and their families have the right to live, love, work, play, learn, and pursue their life aspirations in the community, just as everybody else does. And the framework and the tools are really about having different conversations than people and families might have experienced in more formal settings. So these are conversations about what's possible. So identifying new opportunities and supports that could be helpful for a person as they go through their life. These are conversations that are had as an individual, but also with a family and a team. And as I say family throughout today's presentation, I want you to really think about that broadly too. It's just a catch-all term for any type of relationship that a person considers significant and important in their life. So it's not just the family that you were born with or married into or adopted into, but also those people around us who love and support us and who we love and support. We're also having conversations that reflect on past experiences and what's already been tried to help inform next steps. It's really important to know where a person's coming from to help us guide a conversation about where we're going. And these are conversations about possibility, not just disability. So the Charting the LifeCourse tools, while they were developed by people with disabilities and their families, are designed to be used by anybody. And I think you'll see from today's examples that absolutely everybody can use these in their day-to-day life for looking at challenges and planning ahead. You should have received a handout with today's presentation. There's a tip sheet as well as 2 versions of the star, but you can also get these tools on the Charting the LifeCourse website. You'll see the website at the bottom of most of the slides in today's presentation. It's lifecoursetools.com. And when you go there, you can find the tools in the LifeCourse library. They're under foundational tools, and you'll see that there are person-centered versions of the tools and family perspective versions of the tools. So we'll start with person-centered. When you click on that page and scroll down just a little bit down the page, you'll see links to all of the person-centered LifeCourse tools, and the integrated support star is in that first row with a button to download. And then going back to the foundational tools and using the family perspective link, you'll find the family perspective tools in a similar place on this page. And the reason why we have two different versions of these tools is that we want to value and respect the viewpoints of people themselves and the people who are important to them, their families. But we do want to gather those viewpoints and those ideas separately rather than just mixing them all together. So it's important for each person or a family to have their own space to write down their ideas, to make clear whose ideas we're looking at if we're sharing those out later, and who those perspectives are coming from. So with the integrated support star, we primarily would be using this tool for exploring options or problem solving or planning. And we do that by looking at 5 different elements. And it starts with a person's own personal strengths and assets. These would be skills and abilities that a person has, strengths, knowledge, or past experience, and tangible resources too, the things that a person owns or has access to. We also, of course, think about relationships. So these would include both formal and informal relationships, as well as, friends, acquaintances, coworkers, maybe members of organizations that the person participates in. Technology is an important area of support for most of us. This would include the personal consumer electronics, things like tablets, phones, computers that most of us use every day, as well as specialized equipment or software.
Don't call us no more today.
Or environmental assistive or adaptive technology that might be a little bit more specific to a person's needs or disability. Community-based resources include places, things that we all have access to as members of our community. So things like businesses, parks, schools, faith-based communities. This could also be, clubs or membership organizations. And finally, there are the eligibility specific services and supports that a person might have based on their needs. So this could be as a result of somebody's financial situation or their disability. Could also be members only resources that somebody has access to from other particular groups that they're a member of. And you might be thinking, as we're kind of looking at these categories that, it's a little bit hard sometimes things overlap. I would just encourage you as you're using the star, not to get too hung up on exactly what category something goes in. This is really just meant as an organizational device so that we make sure that we're thinking about all of the different areas available for support. It's not so important to get things in exactly the right part of the star as it is just to get the ideas down in the first place. You might also notice that I mentioned eligibility specific supports last. That was also intentional. Again, when we have these more formal planning conversations in a service capacity with people and their families, a lot of times we jump straight to those eligibility specific supports and services without thinking about all of the other important ways that people meet their needs in their day-to-day life. And then today you get a little bit of a 2-for-1 in today's presentation. I'm primarily talking about the integrated support star, but I also just wanted to touch really briefly on the 3 buckets of needs. This is another LifeCourse principle that I do like to use in conjunction with the star sometimes, and you'll see that in action here in a minute. But just to lightly touch on the 3 buckets of needs, this is a way of looking at the resources that we all use in this way of considering that we need different types of supports and resources to help us. So a lot of times we immediately think about these goods and services that we need, things that I might pay for or arrange for formally. But sometimes needs can just be something like connecting and networking, talking with other people who have been in a similar situation or who might have particular knowledge or experience that could be helpful for me as I navigate through my life. Could also be other types of discovery and navigation. So, looking at information, resources, learning about different options that are available or different ways of doing things. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind too, when you're thinking about different types of ways to meet your needs or the needs of somebody that you're assisting. All right, so on to the hands-on part of today's presentation. We're going to look at how you would start using the integrated support star. And I did mention that in addition to the person-centered and family perspective stars, there are also, as you'll see in your handouts, 2 different versions of the integrated support star. There's a simplified version that just has these 5 elements. And then there's also this split star version that I'm going to use for today's example that organizes ideas between things that are happening now. You could also include things that happened in the past in that now column if that's useful to you. And then things that you might like to explore for the future. So the way that you would start with the integrated support star is starting with usually a problem or a question that you're seeking to explore, to communicate about. So I chose something pretty straightforward for today's presentation. This is a real life experience from my life this past fall, whereby my husband's car kept breaking down and it needed a series of fairly expensive repairs. And that kind of got us thinking about, all right, what do we want to do about this in the future and in more of a long-term kind of way? So we started looking at the star and we used the now sections to list current resources and approaches that we were using. So in this case, one of the great things my husband has going for him is that he's pretty mechanically inclined and adept. He can often fix the car himself. He uses technology, he uses message boards and blogs to get repair advice and talk with other people who are knowledgeable about cars. You can buy parts online. In terms of relationships, he has a dad and brother who are also pretty handy and they can sometimes help him out with repairs. And he can also borrow my car. Our work situation changed a couple of years ago and we don't have overlapping needs as much as we used to. So that's a resource that's available for him now. We live in a city, so he can access the bus and use Lyft for some trips when his car is out of commission. So these are just sort of, some of those initial approaches that we looked at in terms of, all right, here's where we're at now. So the next thing that we did, and that you would probably do if you were diagramming a current situation for yourself, is using these future sections to list possible next steps or additional resources that you might want to explore. So we looked at, first and foremost, we needed to find a good mechanic. We didn't have a very good relationship with the current mechanic, and we did identify that no matter what we decided to do about this car, keep it, sell it, unless it was going to the junkyard, we had to do some repairs on it that John wasn't going to be able to do himself. We did, though, start exploring the feasibility of what if we do decide to sell this car? Do we necessarily need to replace it, or could we share a primary vehicle now that our schedules are really different? We also identified, maybe there's some areas that we should explore a little bit. John became self-employed 2 years ago, and he uses his car primarily for business purposes. So we knew about some small business resources, but realized we have some knowledge gaps there that might be helpful to fill in, to give us more information. course, if we do decide to sell the car, we can use online resources to determine value, list the car for sale, and look for a new vehicle. And then with John's, mechanical wherewithal, he can look over a new car or a used car pretty thoroughly prior to purchasing and make sure that it's going to be the right fit and he's getting a good value out of it. And so you might notice as we're doing this, we're kind of jumping around different parts of the star. That's totally normal. There's no particular place on the star that you need to start or end. Just jot things down as they come to you. And in this case, I even did, kind of the now section first and the future second. You don't have to do it that way. If you have ideas as you're moving through it, just fill things in as they come to you. This is not a linear process. You might also notice that, we had an empty spot in terms of things that we were currently using for eligibility specific resources. If you find yourself with some empty spots on your star, this could be really a couple of different things. It might mean that that particular type of support or resource doesn't apply to your situation, but it also might be a really good signal to you that, maybe this is an area that we could explore in the future. Maybe we just haven't thought about that very much. So the next steps that you might want to do with your integrated support star, and that we did when we were using this process ourselves, is you might want to organize some of your ideas for the future into some logical next steps or assign some priorities to some next steps. So in our case, we did identify we need to find that good mechanic. Again, we need to fix the car before we can do pretty much anything else with it. But while we're waiting for the car to get fixed, let's look into these potential resources that we haven't explored yet. And then after that, we kind of weren't sure what came next. And you'll probably find that if you use the star in this way for yourself, that's pretty typical. You might have to do a couple of things first before you know what comes next. Those first steps might also change things on your star. You might cross some things off that you'd previously considered. So it could help narrow down options. You might also add things. You might learn new things that you want to add. So this isn't a sit down and do this all at once kind of a tool. You can keep using this as your situation evolves. And then lastly, this is where those buckets of needs come in. I also like to think about what type of needs you're trying to meet, what type of resources are going to be really helpful as you're filling this out. So in our case, we recognize our need to find a good mechanic. Obviously, there's a good in service component to that. We need to hire somebody to provide this service for us. But we also recognize that we probably need to do some connecting and networking first. We hired our previous mechanic just based on a couple of reviews online out of the yellow pages. Maybe we should ask around to people that we actually know and get some more personal advice on who we should hire before we approach somebody. And since I'm doing this a little bit after we actually did this, I'll let you know, we did find somebody pretty good through that process. And then, for this self-employment resource kind of stuff, we identified, we have access to the information, to the resources that we would need to be able to learn more about that. That's just something that we need to do. So we don't necessarily even need to go outside our own home for that. That's something that we can just do together with the resources that we already have. So by putting some priority on these things, that kind of helps to develop your next steps. But then by figuring out what exactly is this need, that helps you figure out, is this something I can do myself? Is this something I need to ask other people for? And if I am asking other people, what am I asking them for? So you can be more concrete and then a lot of times have a more successful level of engagement with other people. A few other tips as you're working with your star. Again, it's really designed to help organize and generate ideas. You can use the actual tools, and I think there's a lot of value to using the tools. Some of these things that you're going to be exploring might be complex or more complex than you think, and it is helpful to actually write things down and have something to come back and refer to. But you can also use these same principles just on the fly and in a conversation. You've got 5 different parts of the star. I think it's important just to consider those elements when you're having conversations about support to make sure, are we really looking at the whole array of resources that we could be using in this situation? Now, we've said it a couple of times already, but again, there's no right or wrong way to use this star. There's no right or wrong place to put your ideas. It's really just designed to help expand ideas and to explore different types of support and potentially communicate those to other people. So this is a very, very user-friendly resource that you can truly just dive into. And then lastly, these stars, again, they're not just designed to be done all in one sitting. They're also not designed just to be used for one time or one problem. You can use these over and over again as new situations come up, as new challenges or barriers need to be addressed. And even once you've kind of completed a star, again, you can pull that resource back out and cross things off, add things in, keep track of where you're at, where your progress is, and just keep having that conversation with other people who might be able to help with supports for a meaningful life. So with that, I would like to open it up to questions. I see you may have a couple of things in the chat, which I've been terrible about keeping track of as I present, as I usually am. But please feel free if you'd like to drop any questions in the chat, or if you'd like to just unmute yourself and ask, I'd be happy to converse with you. All right, well, possibly no questions today. Either I put you to sleep or I was very thorough. But again, you have my contact information in the slides and the handouts. So feel free to reach out to me at any time as you're potentially using these tools. I'd be happy to connect with you later as well. Oh, I see a question from Alicia. You talked about crossing things off in the star. I find that can grow frustration. Any suggestions? I guess I just want to make sure I understand the question. So causing frustration in terms of, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and clarify.
Sure. So I work the star with families in my district, and sometimes, well, I actually don't do it anymore, but we would, as we were thinking about things, I sometimes found that parents might go home, depending on the situation, with a star full of things crossed out. And I think that's what was frustrating for families and kind of grew that cynicism of nothing works. And I tend to, like, as we're brainstorming, kind of eliminate things where we can talk about them, but to keep it more positive. I just don't know if anybody else is running across this.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I mean, it's really going to vary person to person. So definitely with any of the suggestions that I've given today, if it's something that doesn't work for you or a particular family that you're working with, don't do it. I mean, this tool, the whole framework is really designed to be for people, families, and these belong to them. So it's most important that it's useful. So if they don't like to cross things off, I would say don't do it. For other people, I think, when I think about crossing things off, sometimes it can be useful. I've found in situations where people feel like, there's just so many choices. I need to help narrow things down to say, well, let's just look at these things right now. Or, like, well, I tried that. I didn't care for that. But I think if you are using it in that, I tried it, it didn't work out, we need to do something else, just making sure that it's not, to kind of to your point, it's not just turning into a, we're just eliminating options exercise, but going forward and saying, okay, well then what else? What, what do we learn from that? How can we use that information? What are some other options that we can go into? So I don't know if that's helpful at all. Any other questions? I will stay on just a couple more minutes through our 12:30 time, just in case anybody does have anything else or would like any additional input or to share anything. But I do just want to thank you again all for coming. I also want to thank our sponsors, Family Resource Network of Ohio, the Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council, and DODD. And as you exit, you will get a short survey. Please just take a moment to fill that out. That'll give us more information about this series, as well as other ways that we can guide our planning for future. So thank you all for spending your lunch with us today.